In this presentation, we begin exploring two-voice counterpoint and everything that's involved with crafting two melodies that work together. Counterpoint is the combination of multiple independent melodic lines. In contrapuntal music, each line tends towards melodic and rhythmic independence. This means that each line will work fine on its own as a melody, and it will also be rhythmically interesting on its own. This independence will also help to support a harmonic framework. And part of this harmonic framework will be balancing the consonances and dissonances that are created by the combining together of these individual lines. When crafting counterpoint, one should take into account the following aspects. First, melody. The tendencies that we've been working on for melodic writing still apply for each of the melodic lines, though particularly in the bass voice, there is sometimes more flexibility with regards to leaps. In harmony, the tendencies for harmonic progression still apply as well. The melodic lines should imply idiomatic harmonic progressions that drive towards a cadence. And we should be careful of our voice leading and dissonance treatment. Each line should approach and resolve dissonances in idiomatic fashions, as well as maintain proper voice leading procedures. In other words, no parallel fifths, octaves, etc. So let's talk about some voice leading considerations for consonances. In the Baroque era, there are two types of consonances: perfect consonances and imperfect consonances. These will be balanced against dissonances, which are unstable intervals that require resolution. Our perfect consonances are our perfect unisons, perfect fifths, and perfect octaves. Like in four-voice chorale style, perfect consecutive perfect unisons, perfect fifths, or perfect octaves should be avoided, as well as the implications of parallels should be avoided. In other words, from beat to beat. When we're working with two-voice counterpoint, it's like a tightrope walk, where everything has to be very carefully balanced and is very easily revealed if it becomes unbalanced. Let's say we have one line that goes like this: C, A, B, G, A, F, G, E. And we have another line underneath that's moving in quarter notes that goes C, B, A, G. If we put those together, they basically imply parallel octaves from beat to beat. That's not quite in this style. Also, it's highly idiomatic for us to use perfect unisons and perfect octaves once we get to cadences. That arrival on the perfect octave is great. Now, our imperfect consonances are our major and minor thirds and major and minor sixths. It's fine to use these consonances in parallel motion, though using more than a string of three is best avoided for now, though there are examples of this, of course, in the literature. Imperfect consonances give us a little bit more flavor, a little bit more roundness, and it won't matter in terms of contrapuntal aspects whether these are major or minor thirds or major or minor sixths. Thirds and sixths, as long as they're major and minor, act the same way in these imperfect consonances. Now let's consider dissonances, which have to be treated much more carefully. Our dissonances are our major or minor seconds. In this style, the perfect fourth, the major or minor seventh, and all diminished and augmented intervals. If we have a dissonance, 99.9% of the time, it must conform to some type of non-chord tone. So, as the harmonic style of the Baroque era is metrically organized, some dissonances are more likely found on strong or weak beats. These dissonances can and should be analyzed like our typical non-chord tones. Weak or off-the-beat dissonances include passing tones or non-chord or neighbor tones, anticipations, particularly at cadences, and escape tones, though these are less common, particularly in the German Baroque. They're more common in the English and French Baroque. On the beat, dissonances include suspensions, which are very common, retardations, which sometimes occur, typically at cadences. Accented neighbor tones and passing tones are fine, though weak beat passing tones tend to be just a little bit more common. Appoggiaturas occur but are less common in this style, and dissonant pedal points, while common in Baroque music, are less frequently found in two-voice writing, though they do occur. But because we want the interaction of these two voices to be very clear and to be very engaging, if we have just one voice holding a pedal point, that's about 50% of the texture that we're not using. So it tends to be just less common in two-voice counterpoint. So let's get to how we analyze two-voice counterpoint. In analyzing two-voice counterpoint, we should be able to account for the aspects of melody, harmony, and dissonance control that we just talked about. So again, we're looking for melodic lines that work together, that work on their own, harmonic implications, and careful controlling of the dissonances. Just a note, the top line of this composition is a cantus firmus, or a fixed voice. This quotes the chorale Es spricht der unweisen Mundvoll, or thus speaks the mouth of the fool. Canti firmi typically use long note values, hence the reason for the relative inflexibility of the top line. So I'm not necessarily saying that your rhythms should look like this, but Jan Pieterszoon Svelink in this example is quoting a chorale tune exactly, and that's why the top line is a little bit less flexible than the bottom line. Put together, they sound like this. Sounds perfectly pleasant. This is what's known as a bikinnium, or just a two-voice piece. So let's talk about looking at the melody. In accounting for melodic writing, we'll look for a number of aspects, including the range and the contour, balance, and keeping rhythmic interest. Now, let's ignore the top melody for right now and take a look at the bottom melody. We'll note if we count up the number of relationships between notes, it's mostly stepwise. We've got one leap here and one leap here. So 1, 2 leaps, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 leaps. But we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. We have almost twice as many notes that are related by step rather than by leap. So we've got a check mark there. We're using mostly stepwise motion, but we do have some sense of leapiness to keep melodic interest. So let's take a look at balance when we are engaging with those leaps. Are they well balanced? If we have a large leap, is it being approached and left by step in the opposite direction? So let's take a look at these two large leaps. This A to A, in this case, it is approached by step going down and left by step going down. So we leap upwards and then we approach and leave it by going down. So we've got a nice balanced line there. Works perfectly fine. And here, we move downwards by leap as well after this, or downwards by step after this large leap. So we've got good balance there. Now, you might point out that we have a leap leading into this large leap, but let's take a look at this. We've got E, C, and C. Now, those consecutive leaps are harmonic, so they imply a C major chord, so that works out perfectly fine. So we have good harmonic implication with our consecutive leaps. Our large leaps are well balanced. We're moving mostly by stepwise motion. We have a nice sense of rhythmic accelerando. And then working in a few slower notes in the midst of it. And if we take a look at the melodic ceiling and floor, we see that everything was working pretty well in each line on its own. So in the bottom line, we have the A as the melodic floor, that occurs only once, and we have the C as the melodic ceiling, that occurs only once. Similarly, in the chorale tune, it's worth pointing out that this G is the melodic floor, and this E is the melodic ceiling, so we have unique melodic ceilings and floors. So all of these aspects, range and contour, balance, and rhythmic aspects, all of these check out and work well in and of themselves in each melody. Each melody could stand on its own as an idiomatic melody. Now, let's take a look at analyzing voice leading and dissonance control. To analyze these aspects, we will use a new analytical technique, which is simply to number the intervals. For each harmonic interval, label that harmonic interval with its Arabic number. And except for augmented and diminished intervals, we will not write the quality. If we run into a dissonance, we'll place that dissonance in parentheses and analyze it with a non-chord tone. And if we have a compound interval, so intervals greater than an octave, those are simply reduced to their simple form. So a tenth would become a third. These numbers will help us check for several aspects. Is there a good mixture of perfect consonances, imperfect consonances, and dissonances? If we just have all perfect consonances, it's going to sound bland. If we have too many imperfect consonances and just those, it's going to sound a little too sweet. And if we've got too many dissonances, it will sound unresolved and unstable. We should also look out for if the dissonances are resolved like non-chord tones. That's how they should be, at least 99% of the time. There are some exceptions. And are there any parallel perfect intervals, unisons, fifths, or octaves, or other voice leading issues that crop up? Now, we'll go interval by interval, and you see that they're numbered down here just with their Arabic number. So this is a perfect fifth, so since it's a consonance, we don't have to, since it's a perfect major or minor interval, we don't have to worry about that. We're only addressing quality when it's an augmented or diminished interval. So here we have a perfect fifth, we label as a 5. Here we have a 4, which is a dissonance, so we put it in parentheses. Then we have a 3, and so on and so forth. I'll just narrate as we go along. We have the unaccompanied line at the beginning, then a fifth, a fourth that's a dissonance acting as a passing tone, a third and a fifth, 3, 6, 3, then an augmented 4. Remember that B is still carrying over. So we have an augmented 4 there, but it's just being treated as a passing tone. Then a 3, a fourth that's being treated as a passing tone, a fifth, a sixth, and then a third. Remember that's a tenth, but we just reduce that down to a third for simplicity. And then 3, a 4 that's acting as a passing, then a 6, an 8, a 5, a 6, 8, 3, 3, then 3, 4 with a passing tone, 3, 4 that acts like a passing tone, a 5, and a 6. So if we balanced all these together, we've got a nice mix. There's some perfect, some imperfect, and some dissonances. And all the dissonances that we've encountered are resolved like non-chord tones. So voice leading and dissonance control gets a check mark. Now we go on to our harmonic analysis. Any passage of two voice counterpoints should also imply an idiomatic harmonic progression. So we'll analyze this normally using Roman numerals and see what the lines imply harmonically. You'll notice that the dissonances you've identified will typically function as non-chord tones in this harmonic context. So here we start off in C. We have a 4 chord. That fourth that we had is a passing tone. Then a 5 with a passing tone. 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. So if we play that progression on its own, 4, 5, 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. That works perfectly fine in terms of an idiomatic Baroque style progression. You might notice that sometimes consonances may suggest dissonances in a harmonic context. So this here is a 5/7 chord. With this F creates that sensation of a 5/7, but it's actually a consonance when we measure it against that D. This is just the byproduct of the lines creating the sense of harmonies, and it creates this interesting tension between how we hear the harmonies and the dissonances that are implied there in the harmonic progression, and how we hear those intervals, those dyads, and how those are acting. It just creates some interesting ambiguity there. And it's worth noting that this particular passage is imitative. This means that an initial melody is stated in one voice, and then that melody is stated in a different voice, typically a fifth higher or a fourth lower, or an octave higher or lower. In this instance, the second entrance, the cantus firmus, is an augmentation, meaning it's stretched out. Its note values are twice the length of the first voice when compared with the original. It also happens that it also overlaps the original statement, which doesn't always happen. So here we have the initial statement. It's imitated in the upper voice, stretched out to twice its value, and transposed a fifth up. So we have some nice motivic unity there with those two different statements of this idea, the Choralton es spricht der Unweisen Mundvoll. So we see Sweelinck combining all these aspects together. Good sense of melody in each line, a good sense of dissonance control, and as well as a good sense of harmonic progression, all within this passage of imitative counterpoint.